Let's see, good afternoon. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Planning Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, February 26, 2025, and it is about 1:46 p.m. First item on the agenda is a roll call to determine quorum.
Ms. Alding? Here. Ms. Gustafson? Here. Mr. Hennigan?
Here.
Mr. Keycapper? Ms. Loomer?
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Now I'll go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for February 26, 2025. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. For items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would also like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment. You'll be called to the front to speak. To ensure everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with the previous commenter rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment or speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during a presentation, please do so, but we'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. So our next agenda item is approval of the agenda, but I have a favor to ask. If someone could plug in this computer, it just totally shut down. So I think it's unplugged. Fortunately, it is only secondary for a short time, but I think it's not plugged in. Yeah. So it just flipped off. Thank you, James. I would have crawled under there, but I thought I'd keep the meeting moving. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, there are no changes to the agenda.
Great. So we'll deem the agenda approved as posted. And now we're on to agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes. Oh, thank you, James. Yeah, IT support in addition to handling all of Nevada's environment. Let's see. We have a set of minutes from the December 18th, 2024 meeting on page 75. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change? If not, any members have any changes? Nope. All right, we have a motion to approve. Anyone or all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Nope. All right, so the motion passes. All right, so that brings us to agenda item 3, discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the intended project outcomes for cultivating community, conserving the basin project of the Tahoe Living Strategic Priority. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 241 of your pack. And I'm going to hand it over to Karen to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Karen Fink with the Long Range Planning Team. I'm here today to give you an update on the Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin phase of our Tahoe Living Strategic Priority. And I also want to note that Jacob Stock is here. He's going to be presenting later at the RPC. He's also lead on this project and may come up to help answer questions. So today we have the first key deliverable from the first stage of this project, and that deliverable is the intended project outcomes. And we're going to be looking for your endorsement on that. And before we get to that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on how we got here today, and then we'll go over the outcomes and why they're important. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Cultivating Community Project is part of our Tahoe Living strategic priority, which is one of 3 strategic priorities of the agency that were included in our operations work plan for this year. And Tahoe Living itself focuses on TRPA's role in providing affordable housing, including workforce housing. It also focuses on community revitalization and achieving our environmental thresholds through those things. Next slide, please. So Cultivating Community is the 3rd phase of the Tahoe Living priority. And we've already completed 2 phases, which I know you're aware of these, but I'll just quickly go over them. So in the first phase in 2021, legalized accessory dwelling units and also provided incentives for converting motels into residential units. Then the second phase, the phase 2, we called it the phase 2 affordable and workforce housing amendments. Those were approved by the governing board in December of 2023, and they provided zoning incentives for deed-restricted housing. And we have some items later on the agenda for this RPC meeting related to those. And then finally, Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin. That's the phase we're in now. This is the most ambitious phase. The working group advised kind of splitting the phases up into sort of the simplest, slightly harder, and then the one that would take the most analysis and resources or research. And so this phase really focuses on things that came out through the other Tahoe Living phases as kind of the next priority, really including the fact, a focus on ensuring that our development rights system is designed to actually provide the type of housing that is called for in our regional plan. So that's going to involve looking at our development rights system. We'll also probably be looking at our fees and some of our permitting processes in this phase. And then also a big component of this project is expanding our capacity to engage with the community, and particularly really increasing two-way communication between all communities, but in particular historically underrepresented groups and groups that are directly impacted by the housing crisis. So we're going to be developing new tools, new ways to help build capacity with those groups. And you'll be seeing those partly talk about some of that in this presentation and in other updates to the governing board. Next slide, please. So the Tahoe Living Project or priority and the Cultivating Community Project tie in very strongly to different goals and policies in the regional plan. And there's too many to list here, but I just highlighted some of the key ones. So there's a housing goals section in the regional plan. And one of the key policies there is to promote housing opportunities for full-time seasonal residents and workers. There's a couple of land use policies that are really, very related to what we're doing. So ensuring the social, economic, and environmental well-being of the region. And then, concentrating development near transit and encouraging infill development. So those are all aspects that we will be looking at in the Cultivating Community Project. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level timeline. We've presented this timeline before. And I want to point out that the project is split into 4 different distinct phases, and we'll be bringing forward deliverables to the RPC at the end of each of these phases for your acceptance or endorsement before we move on to the next phase, or as we're moving into the next phase. So right now, the red arrow is showing that we are wrapping up the listen and explore phase. And this is where we went out to the community to get consensus on what the overall outcomes of this project should be. And so next slide, please. That's what we're talking about today. And so I'm going to get into those outcomes and how we developed them. And the key reason that we are that we focus this first stage of the project on the intended outcomes is that it's really important early in the process to have a clear statement of what we're working towards and what success looks like. And that statement was developed through, a consensus process with quite a bit of visioning from the community as a whole. And so then as we move through the process, we'll be able to look at the policies that are under consideration and compare them back to those outcomes and make sure that they're aligning with what we originally set out to do. So next slide, please. So to develop the outcomes, our staff, together with our consulting team, which is Ramey and Associates, we built out some draft outcomes, and those were really based on what we had heard already through the other phases of Tahoe Living, through the board discussions as we brought the phase 2 housing amendments forward, through public comments. So we already had, and through Tahoe, the Tahoe Living Working Group comments. So we already had, felt like we had a good understanding of what some of the main outcomes should be. But then we took those out to the public in a variety of formats to refine them and to get additional input on things that we may have missed. And so this slide just shows kind of some of the key methods that we use to go out to the public, and we'll be repeating this for each of the upcoming stages of the project. So we had in-person workshops on the North Shore and the South Shore, and we had over 100 attendees at those. We've convened a community partner group, which has representatives from community-based organizations that directly serve the impacted communities or communities most impacted by the housing crisis. We also, it's not shown on the slide, but we also met with individual interest groups such as environmental groups, neighborhood groups, housing organizations, developers, and youth groups. And then we also did an online survey, and we also then brought these to the Tahoe Living Working Group, got final kind of input on it, and then compiled that and brought it forward to what you see in your packet today. So next slide, please. So I'm going to direct you to attachment A for the actual intended project outcomes. And I'll just highlight a few things here without going through every single outcome. So there's a vision, and then there's 4 different sections. So the vision ties back to the regional plan, facilitating community vitality, focusing on compact, walkable neighborhoods, and meeting the overall housing need for the Tahoe Basin, as well as environmental protection. Then we have a section on resilient communities, and this really focuses on having a healthy living environment, preserving natural areas, and creating vibrant communities where people live and work. We also talk about minimizing natural hazards. The housing choice section, this is really where we identify that a key outcome of the project should be to really develop the range of, or facilitate the development of the range of different housing types that our communities need. And there's an outcome related to upward mobility for local families, incentivizing smaller housing types. In the trust and community building section, we talk about wanting to work with a diversity of community members and partner agencies to build ownership in the process, collaborating with the Washoe tribe. We've been working with them on these, as the project has gotten going. And then equity, the equity section, ensuring that priority communities, and those are defined in our transportation equity study, have equitable access to quality housing, near services, transit, education, and other opportunities. And then finally, I just want to highlight that we do have an outcome that is preserving, improving, and supporting occupancy of existing housing used by local households. So there's an emphasis on local households and existing housing. And so with that, to summarize, I kind of went over the process of how we got here, and then went over the intended outcomes of this phase of work that were developed through a variety of means. And I just would like to see if there's questions or comments. And then we have a motion for you to make a recommendation of approval of these outcomes to the governing board. Thank you.
Okay. So open it up for comments, questions from the committee, and then we'll go to public comment. So anything? Shelley?
Thank you. So I guess a question under the equity section of the intended project outcomes, minimizing displacement of current residents. We have an item that's coming before us having to do with the South Shore Plan, and there's speculation, and it's purely speculation, that some affordable housing may be eliminated if the property in question where the boundary line adjustment is being made, or the adjustment to the area plan is being made, is developed for commercial purposes, for condominiums, whatever the ultimate, decision is. So I guess I need clarity on our code as well as state statutes and perhaps federal regulations with respect. My memory is, I thought it was a state statute, and I'm sorry that James had to leave the room, that, when you displace somebody from affordable housing, you have to relocate them to,
Shelley,
yes.
this is a different item. I think you're talking about the next.
No,
or-
but I'm just using that
okay,
as an
I'm
example.
sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I just, the question is there something in our code that has something similar that you have to find a replacement housing within a 50-mile radius? Is that in Nevada statutes? Is that in a federal statute somewhere? Is there anything that's referenced in our code that would address in other words, the conditions that are applied to the elimination of existing affordable housing and the necessity of relocating those folks to comparable housing within a certain distance of where they currently live? And the only reason I bring that up is if it's 50 miles, that kind of negates what we're trying to accomplish here, and that is to keep people from having to commute into the basin to use their affordable housing. And I'm just curious whether or not that's a state statute or is embedded somewhere in our own code.
Yeah, Jacob Stock for the record, and I'll speak to this since I'm involved with both projects, South Shore Area Plan and Cultivating Community. With regard to displacement, so we do have a provision in our code. I believe it's Chapter 37 subdivision regulations that requires any subdivision of condominiums that would remove workforce housing, so that would be affordable or moderate housing, de facto or deed restricted, would require that housing to be replaced on a one-to-one basis within the Tahoe Basin.
Okay.
So that's something that we have existing for condominiums. We don't have a similar safeguard for other for other development types. But when we're talking about a mobile home park, which we'll talk about in the next item, there are additional safeguards that I'll speak about at that time.
Okay, and that would supersede the state requirement that they are required to comply with, which gives them more latitude with respect to how far away they can find substitute housing for the people who are displaced.
Jacob Stock, I believe that's true, and Graham can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I think that's something we'd have to look a little more into, but I'm gonna certainly take note of that. The code that Jacob cited, I mean, I think your question, Shelley, is if it wasn't a condo development or something, it was commercial or something else, would the state law still be, would that state requirement apply? And I'm not sure offhand, so we can add that to
Okay,
our.
I think the state statute, if it's a state, not a federal law, is pretty general. I mean, any affordable housing type has to be replaced.
Okay.
And I think it generally I can remember the Cahill development when those mobile homes were relocated out of the wetland.
The Kale Drive.
The Kale
Yes,
Drive,
right.
yes. I mean, they had I wish I could remember, that was a long time ago, what code in our provision, or what provision in our code or in state statute we followed in terms of demanding that housing be provided within a certain radius of the existing housing that was being eliminated. Just something to give some thought to.
Yeah, Jacob Stock, I can respond to that. I believe, I reviewed the EIS for that project, relatively recently, like in the last few months while I was working on, the other item that we'll talk about next time. But I believe that the statute you're referring to is the Nevada revised statute regulating the removal of mobile home parks. So I believe that's just specific to mobile home parks. And, you know, something, just bringing it back to cultivating community, and that item under equity. I think there is an opportunity in this process to think about other policies that could protect affordable and workforce housing in the Tahoe Basin, not just mobile home parks, not just conversions to condominiums. So I think that's what's being captured there. That opportunity is what's being captured there in the outcomes.
Well, my recommendation would be that we broaden the description to include all types of affordable housing. I don't think we should be restrictive because it presents us with the same dilemma. Those people, for example, under current code, as I understand it, Jacob, in the mobile home situation, park situation, we would probably, the developer would have to follow the state requirements because ours is specific to condominium conversions. So I think it might be worth kind of re-examining that and considering an amendment to our ordinance.
That can definitely be something that we look at in the assess and the next stage, which is called assess and generate. That's where we're generating some of the ideas, and we can take that and add it in.
That would be
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Any other comments? All right, then let's go to public comment on this item. Anyone in the room wish to speak on this agenda item? Nope. All right, let's check online. We've got at least one hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised online. Doug Flaherty, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Intended project outcomes must be based on substantial evidence. This includes keeping Tahoe moving during a wildfire, not just keeping Tahoe moving. No agency, including the TRPA, TTD, NDOT, should make it harder for residents or visitors to escape deadly fast-moving wildfires. And this is in connection with the transportation element that was mentioned by the staff speaker. Finally, TRPA continues its efforts to greenwash and affordable housing washing, especially since workforce housing almost always results in market rate housing. I find it interesting that you're really, and my heart goes out to anyone that's displaced, but I find it interesting that the comment is being made, oh, we need to protect displaced persons. But gosh, we don't want to talk about protecting residents and visitors during a fast-moving wildfire, do we? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. All right, let's see, another hand.
Yes, Mr. Chair, another hand went up. Aaron Casey, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Erin Casey. I am the CEO for the Tahoe Housing Hub, and I actually just want to thank the TRPA and your staff for your continued efforts here. I hear criticisms often around public engagement, and I think that this effort has been one that has been amazing. I've attended several of these meetings. There have been a lot of other individuals there. I really have appreciated the opportunity to participate in this process and to learn alongside colleagues and other community members about what's important to them. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And we will continue to support your efforts here and participate in any way that we can. But just really wanted to acknowledge the level of work and the extent that you all have gone to really engage the public around these issues. And I just wanted to also add that we have not seen affordable or workforce housing projects become market rate housing. I'm not sure where that information is coming from or where that data is, but that is not what we're seeing on our end of things. But nonetheless, thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak and to thank you, your staff, as well as this committee and the governing board for the continued commitment of public engagement with an emphasis around workforce and affordable housing initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Looks like we don't have any other members raising their hands. All right, then we'll close public comment on this item. Any committee members have any final comments before we move on? All right, so I think what we're looking for is a motion to recommend this to the full governing board. So is there a motion from a committee member?
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of the intended project outcomes as shown in attachment A of our agenda or our governing board packet.
Great, thank you, Shelley. All right, let's, any discussion on that? Nope. Okay, let's go to a roll call vote.
Ms. Alding?
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson?
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper? Ms. Loomer?
Yes.
Mr. Settlemyer? Mr. Henigman?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. All right, so that brings us to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the amendments to Douglas County's South Shore Area Plan, including an adjustment to the Kingsbury Town Center boundary, changeable sign standards, meaning frequency by which signs can change their display, an energy conservation strategy, and implementation of the Phase 2 housing amendments, which provide more flexible development standards for deed-restricted, affordable, and workforce housing in town centers and areas zoned for multifamily. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 251 and page 311 of your packet. So now we're going to pass it to Jacob and Elizabeth Bettinger to talk about this, although it looks like we have a substitution.
Right, and I'm gonna heat it up a little bit.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, you are definitely not Elizabeth.
No, I'm not. Karen is Alyssa today. But,
Okay, all right.
A couple of things I wanted to point out. One is you have 2 staff reports from Douglas County because Douglas County item in 4 and the Placer County item in 5 are actually implementation of the second phase of the Tahoe Living Working Group, which you just saw. So Alyssa usually does those, but she snuck a vacation in, so Karen's filling in for her. And Jacob has been handling the South Shore item, so he'll introduce that. But I also thought it was important for the committee to realize that, kind of celebrate a little bit. Here we are, Phase 2 of our Tahoe Living Working Group. Information or those amendments got approved in late 2023. And one of the options for implementing those is that we adopt that into the area plans. And so we're doing that as we're continuing in Phase 3, we're seeing some of the code amendments from Phase 2 get implemented into our code and into the area plan. So it's give yourselves a little bit of a pat on the back. And with that interlope, I will turn it over to Jacob to introduce the South Shore area plan amendments.
Thanks, John. Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA. Could we switch to the next slide, please, Tracy? And the next slide, I guess, too. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So, like I said, my name is Jacob Stock. Already introduced myself. I'm here to introduce a proposed amendment to the Douglas County South Shore Area Plan. That proposal includes amendments to add the entirety of 201 Manor Drive to the Kingsbury Town Center. That parcel is currently split zone. Part of the parcel is within the town center district and the other part is outside of the area plan boundary. So this would rectify that split zoning. The amendment also incorporates sign standards in the area plan, and it updates the allowed changeable sign frequency in the casino core from every 15 minutes to every 5 minutes. And I'll get into more detail about that later. And it also adds an energy conservation strategy to the South Shore Area Plan. Definitely something that I could use right now after having pasta for lunch. So as John Hester mentioned, you'll hear You'll also hear the proposal incorporating the phase 2 housing standards into the area plan. So I'll give a presentation. Well, I'll introduce a presentation from AJ with Douglas County on the county-led portion of the area plan amendment. Then we'll hand it off to Karen for a presentation on the phase 2 implementation component. And then we'll ask you all to make a motion on the 2 combined items, or to consider a motion on the combined 2 items. I'll also note that this proposal does not include amendments associated with the proposed new hospital facility in State Line. An environmental assessment is being prepared to analyze the hospital proposal, which is not finalized or sufficiently detailed to be included in this item. So you'll see that at a later date, which is not scheduled yet. Next slide, please. So before I hand this off to Douglas County staff, I'd also like to summarize and respond to some discussion items that came up during the Advisory Planning Commission hearing. The APC recommended this item for approval by the governing board with 8 votes in the affirmative and 5 votes opposed. So there were some issues that came up that were raised by APC members. The first I'll highlight is APC members expressed concern that future redevelopment at 201 Manor Drive, which is currently a mobile home park, could result in the loss of affordable housing units. So there's currently no proposal to redevelop that site, just a proposal to rezone it. Should a proposal come forward in the future, it would go to the governing board for discretionary review. There's a requirement in the code that any redevelopment project that results in the loss of 10 or more mobile home parks has to go to the governing board for discretionary review, no matter what the proposal is. So you would be hearing that again, and it would be subject to mitigation under the IEC. Chapter 13 addresses affordable housing impacts in the IEC, so you would be able to review those and apply mitigations. Also, as I mentioned in the last item, if condominiums were proposed at the site, then affordable units would need to be replaced on a 1-to-1 basis. Next slide. So some members of the APC also felt that the IEC didn't sufficiently analyze the impact of potentially more intensive development at 201 Manor Drive. So staff believe that the IEC sufficiently analyzes the plan level impacts, and we can't speculate in these environmental documents. That's not the role of an IEC. The role is to analyze the plan level impacts, and when a project is proposed for that site, it will require a specific environmental analysis that again would be reviewed by the governing board. Next slide. Finally, some APC members questioned whether the proposed new frequency for changeable signs would cause driver distraction or scenic impacts. So regarding driver distraction, the Federal Highway Administration has guidelines for preventing motorist distraction from changeable signs, and the frequency that they set is no less than every 8 seconds for every changeable sign change. So a message would be up for 8 seconds, and then it could change. To prevent driver distraction, the county is proposing a change every 5 minutes at the least. So driver distraction, according to FHA guidelines, would not be an issue here. And regarding the scenic impact, staff doesn't believe that there would be a significant scenic impact from this change. It takes 6 minutes to walk the entire length of the casino core from one end to the other. And so a change every 5 minutes is unlikely to cause a noticeable scenic impact. Currently, if you walk across the district, you'll either see it change once or you'll not see it change at all. Under the new proposed conditions, you would maybe see it once if you notice. And so with that, I will introduce AJ with Douglas County for a presentation.
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning, good afternoon, committee members, and all those present today. I'm AJ Hames. I'm with the Douglas County District Attorney's Office, It's not typical that the district attorney's office will present planning matters, but our principal planner was very sad she had to, was unable to be here today. She got called to a family emergency and had to travel last minute to Sacramento. So we hope things are going well with her. I have worked with her on this, this project, and so I'm filling in. Let me start here. If you look at these slides, you'll see a vicinity map. This is the South Shore Area Plan. It encompasses properties such as Edgewood, the Casino Core, the Kingsbury Town Center, and the high-density tourist district along Highway 50 from State Line to Lower Kingsbury, and also includes various zoning, namely tourist, recreation, resort recreation, and mixed use. Next slide, please. The South Shore Area Plan was first adopted in 2013, and it is part of the TRPA Regional Plan. The South Shore Area Plan replaced the Kingsbury and State Line community plans and the relevant plan area statements. Those previous plans were over 20 years old and had undergone only minor changes during their lifetime. So the South Shore Area Plan, in comparison, was a newer document and is now just over 11 years old. Next slide, please. So as stated by Jacob, the Douglas County proposed South Shore Area Plan revisions include the expansion of the Kingsbury Town Center South Shore Area Plan boundary to include the entirety of the Kingsbury Manor Mobile Home Park, revising signage regulations within the Tahoe mixed use, Town Center and Tahoe tourist, high density tourist overlay zoning districts, and we're updating references to the TRPA Code of Ordinances. Many of those references incorporate in the Phase 2 housing amendments. We're also incorporating an energy conservation strategy. Regarding the proposed boundary extension, it's important to point out that this inconsistent zoning was created by TRPA in the county when the town center and South Shore area boundary were first created. You can see here this one parcel should not have been dissected in the first place. This amendment fixes that mistake. Currently, the mobile home park has one portion consisting of nearly 1 acre. Seen here is the black hatched areas, which is within the commercial town center and the South Shore Area Plan boundary. The remaining portion, which you can see in yellow, which is 3.64 acres, is outside the town center and the South Shore Area Plan boundary. Bring the entirety of this parcel within the South Shore Area Plan, and the town center boundary provides zoning consistency. This boundary expansion was approved by the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners in January of 2015, but as noted in the staff report, it was never brought before TRPA, and so it never became effective. The county was required by TRPA to provide an initial environmental checklist this time around. That is included in your packet, and Nanette Hansel from Ascent Environmental was hired to prepare that. She is present here today, so if you have any specific questions about the IEC, she can address those. I wanted to address this in our presentation to provide context and clarity in relation to the findings in the IEC. There was, as Jacob noted, a lengthy discussion during the APC meeting a couple weeks ago regarding those findings, and some members questioning if those findings have been met. Again, I think it's clear that they have, and Ms. Hansel is available if you have questions about that. Next slide, please. So in relation to the town center boundary expansion, I wanted to reiterate what Jacob shared earlier. Here's a section of the TRPA Code of Ordinances in Chapter 2, which states the elimination of 10 or more mobile homes requires governing board review. I want to ensure committee members are aware that any future redevelopment of the Kingsbury Manor Mobile Home Park would require governing board review. Also interesting to note, the owners of the mobile home park did not realize that their entire property was not within the town center. They were not aware of this until recently when county staff informed them that they were still split zoned. They were under the impression that the 2014 amendments, which were never brought before TRPA, had been approved. I think it's relevant because this isn't something that they're pushing. It's actually the opposite. They thought they'd received the zoning 10 years ago and they didn't do anything at that point in time to redevelop the property. And they still have not submitted any proposal or project for redevelopment at this time. Next slide, please. So beyond just trying to fix the split zoning on the parcel, there is also a good planning justification for this change. Currently, the mobile home park does not connect to other residential areas via any open public roadway. It's only accessible by traveling on Manor Drive, past other commercial and mixed-use properties. Historically, this parcel has been used for mobile home units, but that use has declined as the property has grown older. There are currently 3 vacant spots the park has been unavailable to fill. They've been available for a year and a half. In addition, it's becoming less economically feasible for the mobile home unit owners to bring new mobile homes into the park to replace the older homes, which really should be retired. With the current zoning, if the mobile homes were to be replaced with other residential structures, it would be limited, if not mobile homes, to one single family dwelling. So it's a single parcel. It's zoned for just 2 residential uses currently, and that's a mobile home park with a special use permit or one single family residence. In contrast, with zoning consistency, we can see here in this table, the uses would be increased. The current uses would be retained, including mobile housing, but additional uses allowed that are not currently available on the portion of the property outside the town center and South Shore area plan boundaries. The Phase 2 housing amendments are also being proposed to be implemented into the South Shore area plan, and these projects can only occur within the town center. This parcel with rezoning would be in its entirety within the town center, allowing the potential for a Phase 2 project with some restrictions due to the property's coverage and height restrictions. If they choose in the future to redevelop, the high density use could potentially provide much needed employee housing, affordable housing like apartments, or multifamily housing needs that we project are not going to go away for some time. Those uses, we believe, are more beneficial than replacement by a single family residence. The expanded uses also include tourist accommodations, entertainment, or commercial uses. There's no way to project what any owner may or may not bring forward in the future, but staff believe this parcel should not have inconsistent zoning, making any type of redevelopment very challenging. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously, when the South Shore Area Plan was adopted in 2013, it absorbed the Kingsbury and State Line community plans. These plans previously followed the standards in the design standards and guidelines for the Lake Tahoe region of Douglas County. This is a copy of that old design standard manual. Most of the important aspects of that were then incorporated into the South Shore Area Plan's design standards, with the exception of some sign regulations. So what you are presented with today are sign regulations that were mistakenly omitted from these original design standards. Those are now going to be incorporated into the South Shore Area Plan, and a change to the changeable copy regulation, reducing that from 15 minutes to 5 minutes. Next slide, please. I think we can go ahead to the next slide. All right. As stated in the county staff report, attachment A, in addition to the 2014 ordinance related to the zoning map amendment, the 2014 resolution incorporating an energy conservation strategy into the South Shore Area Plan was also approved by the Board of County Commissioners, but never brought forward to TRPA for approval. Although it was never adopted or presented to TRPA, Douglas County has been implementing many of those energy conservation strategies since that time. Those programs that were suggested as energy strategies back in 2014 have now been completed. This new resolution incorporates a new energy conservation strategy section in the South Shore Area Plan and complies with mitigation 3.5.1 of the regional plan. Just by way of information, there are some other changes to the South Shore Area Plan. TRPA and county staff did complete updates in the proposed new version, including tables, maps. There was some reformatting, the inclusion of a table of contents, administrative items such as that. Those are updated in the new South Shore Area Plan. And that is it. So again, thank you for your patience with me. I'm a little out of my element here, but I am available to answer questions. And as I stated before, Nanette Hansel from Ascent Environmental is here as well, and she can answer questions related to the IEC. In addition, we do have here present today Brendan Hall. He is the trustee for the Hall Trust, which owns the Manor Mobile Home Park. And so if you have specific questions about that parcel, he is available to answer those questions as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You did a good job, a fine job as a planner. Maybe we'll let you in the club later after this, but I mean, lawyers are a little hard to let in, but we've gotten over it with Graham, so we can slip you in. Did you have something else, Karen?
Yes,
Yeah,
I think
okay.
we should just quickly do the slides on phase two and then we could get back to the questions.
Okay.
There's just those 2 slides, I think. Thanks. So next slide, please. Just as I mentioned in my previous presentation, in December, the TRPA Governing Board approved the phase 2 housing amendments. And part of those amendments were that local jurisdictions needed to initiate adoption of the amendments into their own area plans within 1 year. Next slide, please. And there were 3 options to do that. Jurisdictions could just choose to opt in and adopt the phase 2 housing amendments as is. They could opt out and propose alternative changes that have an equal benefit. Or following 1 year of the changes taking effect, TRPA could assume lead agency role and adopt the changes into the area plans on behalf of the local jurisdiction if they didn't choose 1 or 2. So for Douglas County, and as you're going to see after this for Placer County, Douglas County did not take action within 1 year, so we initiated the process to adopt the same changes that were approved in December into the South Shore Area Plan, and we've now folded these into one motion and are asking for your consideration of approval today, and then we'll take this forward to the governing board in March if you recommend approval.
Great, thank you. All right, committee members, have any questions? Thank you guys for your presentation, by the way. No comments. Shelley?
You know, I rarely see this sort of division at the APC. I mean, there were 8 affirmative votes and 5 opposed. I did listen to part of the discussion yesterday evening. Jacob, can you go in a little more detail? I mean, they were obviously concerned about the changeability, in other words, the timing of these changes from 12 to 5 minutes. Were there other concerns, and irrespective of the change in the area plan with respect to 201 Manor Drive? I'm just related to the changes in the sign ordinances being proposed right now. Were there other concerns that they expressed during the course of that meeting?
Jacob Stock for the record. So good question. With regard to the changeable sign or the sign section, the only concerns that came up from APC were related to the changeable signs. And those could be really divided into the 2 categories that I mentioned earlier. So the potential to cause distraction. APC members spoke about, blinking or flashing lights, which is a term that's used in the Code of Ordinances. Talked about the character of the community and not wanting to be like Las Vegas, which, we hear a lot. And TRPA staff, based on the proposal that we reviewed from Douglas County, the IEC, we don't share those concerns. And so that was one. And then the second, the second concern was about scenic quality. And of course, these signs are existing signs. They're already in place. They already change currently every 15 minutes. The proposal is that they would change every 5 minutes. And given the speed of travel in the casino core, we don't believe that this is going to be a noticeable change, and staff wouldn't recommend deviating from what's already been proposed by Douglas County and analyzed.
But that presupposes that this is a static system. I mean, you've got Barton Memorial, that project, which is part of this area plan, right? They're going to be, I presume.
Well, I'll correct that really quick, Jacob Stock. That Barton Hospital is not in the casino core, so the changeable sign regulations wouldn't apply there.
Are there any other properties that don't currently have signage that could apply for signage? I'm thinking about the cumulative impacts. I mean, you're analyzing this in terms of the scenic impacts based on a static system. In other words, we have X number of signs. If they all, reverted to using this amendment in the code, there would be no impact. But is there a potential for additional signs? Some of these signs are quite large. I mean, and I understand the casinos are big buildings but one is 24 by 24 feet. I mean, that's a big sign. And I don't know whether our code requires that we look at cumulative impacts that might be permissible under these changes within the area being discussed.
Yeah, Jacob Stock for the record. That's a really good question. One thing I'd like to do is go back in response to that question, go back and look at the requirements for a new, the addition of a new changeable sign. I don't know those off the top of my head, so I can't speak to that. But just going off of the findings that we as staff reviewed in order to, make our recommendation. The findings ask whether this would result in blinking or flashing. We find that that's not the case. And then, I provided the examples as well of the number of changes that a pedestrian walking at normal speed would see walking across the casino core.
Right, but the assumption is that you have the same number of signs
Right.
there today. And there's no opportunity for additional signs to be erected.
And if I could, John Hester for the record, try to go back to you listened to the ABC
Sure.
comments. And I also want to point out the comments we got from Ellie Waller. I think there was some confusion that when we talked about going from 12 to 5, I think they were thinking seconds, because that's exactly what's in Ellie Waller's comments. And we were talking 12 minutes to 5 minutes,
Sure.
which is not noticeable. And when the comments started out from the APC, one of the first comment on signs was, what's blinking and flashing? Well, every 5 minutes is not blinking, or 12 is not blinking and flashing. So I suspect part of what was going on was, I don't know that for sure, but I suspect part of what was going on was a misunderstanding of the frequency.
Right, right. And no, I agree with that. And I wasn't confused by that. 5 minutes is a long time. But I was just concerned about, the code is being amended. Douglas County is going to take over the permitting authority, I presume, right? Pursuant to these changes to your sign ordinance.
This is Jacob Stock. There's currently that won't be the case. TRPA would still be the reviewing and approving agency.
Okay, but you would be enforcing their code, the amendments to their code, right?
Right. So we would be enforcing the amendments to the code language in their area plan. Yeah.
So any additional signs that might be proposed in the future would have to be reviewed and approved by TRPA staff. And in that case, you might find that even though now with the finite number of signs in that area, there is no impact to scenic, but with let's say the Friday Station property, for example, just to the north of the event center ever were to be developed, you might have additional signs installed and the outcome of that analysis might be different. Right? Is that a fair assumption?
And I'll jump in, Mr. Chair, Julie Reagan, TRPA's director. Yes, my understanding is that the area plan boundary is at the light and does not extend past the event center. Could you clarify that, Jacob?
Yeah, that's correct. The area plan boundary is from the state line to the light at the intersection. So it terminates at the event center property.
So not at the Edgewood parcel at the Friday Station. And then just to build on that, we will check it out, but our anecdotal recollection is that most of those larger signs that you see are grandfathered and there wouldn't be opportunities for a proliferation of those, but we'll run that down. But the point you're making on the record is correct. Like, we do not have the MOU for permit streamlining, TRPA would be involved with future actions.
Okay, so some of those signs are non-conforming currently and would have to be, in other words, are they larger than what's being proposed here?
I don't know if they're considered non-conforming, but.
Well, they're grandfather, that means they're not conforming. I mean, generally, that's an indication that
Yeah, I
they're
don't know.
not in compliance.
We will find out before it gets to
Okay,
the
that's
governing
fine,
board.
that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, we'll find
Okay.
out exactly the status.
Okay.
I could also just add that in the IEC, projects do need to be consistent with the scenic quality improvement program. So they would need to show that they wouldn't be making the scenic roadway quality worse.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Any other, James?
Since we're on the discussion, so I'm going to further muddy the waters. If somebody could give me an answer back, I'm curious that, let's say that if there was a casino, multi-story, within the casino corridor, and they wanted to tear it down and rebuild, are they limited to the height limitation? Or can they go back to the height that they have currently, or they're going forward?
This is Jacob Stock. So there is a alternative height standard in the casino core. I don't know it off the top of my head. I believe it's over 200. It's 197, and Nanette knows it off the top of her head.
If I could phone a friend, I'd appreciate it.
It's the same height as the existing casinos, I believe.
Mr. Chair, Lou Feldman, to answer Director Settlemyer's question, the compact allows the existing structures to be reconstructed to their existing envelope. So they can be rebuilt.
Okay, I really
within the
appreciate
existing
that
Cuba
information.
colony.
I was given bad information by another individual, so I won't correct them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I have one on the affordable housing. So under its current zoning, it can be a mobile home park, or you said a single family home. A single family, if someone wanted to redevelop it, they would still have to replace those units, but somewhere within 50 miles per state law, not TRPA code. If they wanted to turn it into condominiums, then it would follow our requirements of replacing affordable housing within the basin. But without changing the zoning, there's nothing else it could be, right? It couldn't be commercial or a new casino or anything like that without coming before us to change the zoning. Is that true?
That's correct. So currently the zoning allows for a single family home or mobile homes, the existing use. Actually couldn't be subdivided into condominiums currently. So that would be a possibility under the proposed zoning.
And we would, if they rezoned it, if they wanted to be rezoned for a condominium project, it would come before us for that rezoning.
It wouldn't be a rezoning. It would be a subdivision approval. Yeah, but yeah, that would come before us. Any redevelopment that replaces the mobile home park would come before the governing board.
Okay. Great. Any other comments? I would call a vote. I think we still have our quorum. Oh yeah, that's right. We have public comment. Sorry about that. I was going to go back to my cheat sheet and it would have taken me there. All right, so we're going to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Regional Planning Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So anyone in the room? We have one. Thank you, Lou.
Good afternoon again, Lou Feldman on behalf of the South Tahoe Alliance of Resorts. We support this. Lou Feldman on behalf of the South Tahoe Alliance of Resorts, which consists of the casino core properties as well. We support the staff recommendation. And in particular, I did want to highlight that the changeable copy, which is currently at 15 minutes, not 12 minutes, to 5 minutes, the genesis for that was wayfinding with respect to the event center, so that if parking is absorbed at Bally's, for example, we have the opportunity to be a little more responsive to say there is a parking supply here or a parking supply there. And I certainly appreciate Jacob's observation about the 6-minute walk. You would have to be staring at the second hand of your watch for a long time before you noticed any change in copy, whether you're in a car or on foot. So hopefully you folks are comfortable with a 5-minute interval. Some folks have proposed video boards. That's not what's before you. A 5-minute interval is all that we are seeking. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? All right, sir.
Good afternoon. I was kind of debating on whether or not to come up, but one thing is, again, my name is Brendan Hall. I'm the trustee that owns the Manor Mobile Home Park. Also on that property, it doesn't really show clear on the map. We do have 2 office projects on that property as well. And we own the entire Manor Drive where we maintain it and whatnot. But one thing I don't think anybody, even including Douglas County, is aware of this. That property, of course, was a gift to the family some 50 years ago when my grandfather was developing Lower Kingsbury. As I mentioned to the APC, my family's one. This whole Lower Kingsbury was nothing. Or, the house that's there next to the mobile home park was the first house on Kingsbury Grade, and that was my grandfather's home that my dad lived in or was born in and whatnot. So that was a gift to the family, and it was a remnant of land that he was developing for Ponderosa Mobile Home Park. And the trust guidelines or the trust agreement that forms the trust says that property has to maintain in the trust is the seed property. And it's an irrevocable family trust, and the life of the trust is 20 years past my natural death, or 25 years, excuse me. So we don't have any plans on selling it. We don't have any plans on changing it. We do have a small caveat that says that we can dispose of it if it's not financially feasible to maintain it. But we don't have the capital, the funding, whatnot to change it. Now, granted, the mobile home park is long past its life. I mean, a lot of those units are just, I'd say, go walk through it. And they're 1972 units. They're falling apart. We just worked a deal with one owner because this unit was literally separating. He was using nylon straps to keep it together. And we just said, hey, sign it over to us, which is legal, and we'll just let you, just abandon it, and we'll demolish it and, go about your life. He lives up in Tacoma, and this is a part-time home that he never comes down anymore. But there's other homes out there that we're probably going to do the same type of deal with them. And the long and the short is unless somebody comes up and says, hey, some developer says, we have mega money and willing to front and displace and find other homes for these people and build something there, which is not practical. It's going to be what it is for the last 50 years, for the next 50 years. And, my job is to just right now, I'm trying to foster new homes to come in, new modular homes. I own the property. I think I'm a little exempt here. We're talking about my property, but any regard, I just wanted to let the board know our intentions.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else in the room? All right, seeing no one, we'll go online. I see we have at least one hand.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised. Doug Flaherty, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. The staff report IEC fails to sufficiently analyze the effect of wildfire ignitions, inform the public of wildfire risk, including evacuation timing, and does not adequately disclose the increased risk of future area plan project impacts associated with already existing public peril evacuation capacity, roadway capacity baseline conditions. TRPA and partner agencies' approval of individual and cumulative Lake Tahoe Basin regional area plans and projects, which increase height, density, and coverage, making it harder for people to escape a deadly wildfire, violate the Nevada Constitution, Article 1:1, inalienable rights, which states all men have certain inalienable rights, among which are pursuing and obtaining quote unquote safety and happiness. I further point the APC, excuse me, not the APC, this was from the committee, to a regional plan goal LU 3.2, which states no person or persons shall develop property so as to endanger the public health, quote unquote, safety and welfare. I once again place the TahoeCleanAir.org Independent Lake Tahoe Basin Wildfire Evacuation Analysis on the record today, as I did during the TRPA October 24, 2024 governing board meeting. The 2024 South Shore Area Plan IEC fails to provide substantial evidence to make the less than significant effect findings in connection with weather impacts, which are individually limited but cumulatively considerable, and fails to provide substantial evidence to make a no finding as to whether the project may have environmental impacts which will cause substantial adverse effects on human beings, either directly or indirectly. Therefore, due to substantial new evidence regarding wildfires and Tahoe roadway wildfire evacuation capacity timing since the 2012 regional plan, as well as a variety of and multiple scientific studies discussing the degradation of Lake Tahoe, the TRPA must prepare a cumulatively comprehensive EIS rather than an IEC or EA in connection with the proposed area plan, and must include the Barton facility, the proposed U.S. Forest Service Trails Plan, the US 50 Corridor Management Plan, and probably a myriad of other 10 or 12 major plans around the basin. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. All right, next up.
Next hand raised is Helen Neff. Helen, please unmute to make your comment. Helen, if you're there, please unmute yourself to make your comment.
I'm sorry, that was an error.
Okay, thank you. There are no other hands raised to comment.
Okay, so, all right, great. So no more hands raised, so we'll close public comment at this time. Any further comments from the committee? Shelley?
You know, one of the advantages of this amended language is that it also applies, but actually identifies as one a permissible use, direction, and safety signs. So in the event of an evacuation, there would be the opportunity to use these changes in the code to facilitate the erection of a sign that could be used. I mean, any sign actually in this area could be, well, I don't know if it could be converted, but you could certainly change a message that would be serve as a notice to people that, you know, there's a state of emergency, that they're required to evacuate. But I think adding that and including direction and safety signs is an important component of this revision because it does serve a public purpose.
All right, thank you, Shelley. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none. All right, can we get a motion? One of the committee members, if you could put up the motion. Great.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of the required findings described in attachment F to the staff summary and attachment C of the staff summary for phase 2 affordable and workforce housing amendments, including a finding of no significant effect, with the one caveat that TRPA will examine its own code as it applies to the relocation of displaced residents for possible amendment to the code to require that apply to other forms of housing. I'll get back to the motion.
I think that's already part of, is that already part of the plan?
No.
You were saying? Because this is like the
This is for both.
vision, but is it?
Right,
both?
it's
Okay.
for both. I believe it's for both, right?
That caveat that you made seemed more relevant for the cultivating community item, but we didn't include any change in the motion, but we just assured you that, or I can assure you that we will consider that change in the next stage, which we're beginning now.
It was my mistake for not bringing it up earlier. I apologize. Let me reframe the motion. I move to recommend approval of the required findings as described in attachment F to the staff summary and attachment C of the staff summary for phase 2 affordable workforce housing amendments, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the area plan amendments as described in the staff summary and the staff summary for the area plan amendment for phase 2 affordable and workforce housing amendments. It's the first motion.
All right,
You want
thank
to take the
you.
motion separately?
Any
Brown?
questions, comments? Nope. All right, then I guess we need a roll call vote.
Ms. Aldine,
Aye.
Ms. Gustafson,
Aye.
Mr. Keycapper, Ms. Loomer,
Aye.
Mr. Settlemyer.
Aye.
Mr. Henigman.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
Okay, I
Great,
further
thank you.
move to recommend adoption of ordinance 2025 amending ordinance 2013 05 to amend the Douglas County South Shore Area Plan as shown in attachment E to the staff summary and attachment A to the staff summary for the area plan amendment for the phase 2 affordable and workforce housing amendments.
All right, Maria? Vote.
Ms. Gustafson,
No. No, we don't need a second. Aye.
No.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper, Mr. Settlemyer. Mr. Henigman.
Yes. Okay,
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
great, thank you. Ooh, so that brings us to agenda item number 5. Discussion and possible recommendation of an amendment to Placer County's Tahoe Area Basin Plan to implement the Phase 2 housing amendments, which provide more flexible development standards for deed restricted affordable and workforce housing in town centers and areas zoned for multifamily. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 367 of your packet. So we have stand-in Alyssa today. That's going to be you, Kim, right? All right.
Unfortunately, I'm not skiing in Japan, but I am here, Karen Fink with the Long Range Planning Team. So I will just quickly present very similar slides that I presented for the Douglas County amendments. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, counties have, or local jurisdictions have 3 options for how to handle the phase 2 housing amendments: to opt in, opt out with alternatives, or have TRPA take an action to adopt the amendments and take lead agency role. And so for Placer County, similar to Douglas County, Placer County's Board of Supervisors did earlier this month approve a work plan to incorporate the phase 2 amendments into the area plan. However, they didn't take that action within a year. So we had already moved forward consistent with what the governing board approved in December 2023 to adopt their amendments as the lead agency. So that's what we're doing today. And again, after you make your motion, we will take this forward to governing board in March.
Great, thank you. Any committee member comments?
I'll make a couple, and then I might ask Crystal Jacobson, our Assistant Director of CEDRA, who is in the back of the room patiently all day, if she has any comments. We did discuss this at the February 4th meeting of our Board of Supervisors. We realize that we haven't come up and discovered any other feasible alternatives, and so we do need to opt in to this situation. The board heard public testimony from some small local developers who are very anxious to propose their projects and bring those forward that could take advantage of these these changes. And so we're trying to facilitate that and streamline this process and support this, coming into those amendments. I know there's members of the public that have contacted our office and spoke at our Board of Supervisors meeting on the public process. There will be, through the county process, additional public meetings. But Karen was kind enough to give me all of the background, because I can't remember day to day, week to week, month to month, how many meetings we held as the working group. But just a reminder that we had 1.5 years of process in which the Tahoe Living Working Group met. There were 9 publicly noticed meetings, but there were also 27 community meetings throughout that time soliciting feedback to that process. Not to say that it's ever enough, but it's certainly, we gave plenty of opportunity for people to suggest new ideas, different ideas, and we've had this last year and 2 months for people to come up with other ideas versus being in this, moving forward with these amendments. So I do think the changes we made when we made those recommendations and reducing those to the town centers and to the multifamily zone properties only also creates more protections for the community as well. So anyway, Crystal, did you want to, I mean, you've sat here all day, so it's 3:00. You might want to say a few words.
There we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Crystal Jacobson with Placer County. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and happy to be here today. I just wanted to mention our board did direct staff to move forward with a work program to incorporate the phase 2 housing amendments into what we call the TBAP. And so we are currently working to prepare a contract with a environmental consultant to prepare a CEQA document. So we do have to take lead agency status to do the CEQA work. So we're kind of moving forward in that way. We anticipate that this will be done. Our goal really is to have it done by the end of the calendar year. It may be more like fall by the time it gets to our board, but we are moving forward. We appreciate all the work that TRPA has done. A lot of the environmental analysis that your team has done, we're able to use in our analysis. So we do appreciate that and appreciate the partnership and really advancing, good housing policy. So this is something that, we have seen a lot of interest in already. We've got folks kind of lined up and ready to go on projects in Placer County. And so again, just really appreciate that TRPA is kind of moving this forward.
And Crystal, there will be public meetings at the county level as well as both today and then at the governing board meeting next month.
Yes, so we are actually pulling together a town hall meeting in March. I don't know if we landed on a date yet on that one, but there will be a town hall meeting just to kind of kick it off and introduce it on our end. And then moving forward, we will it'll have to go through our planning commission, probably a trip to our municipal advisory council, and then to our board as well. So lots of opportunity for folks to weigh in on our side. This is really just the beginning for us. I also wanted to mention we had initially intended to bring our work plan. We do a long range work plan and had intended to bring that forward to our board last fall. We had a lot of items going to our board, so it didn't get there in the fall. And so that's really the reason behind the delay. But again, we've gotten the green light to move forward. And so excited to get it done.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Please.
Want to reciprocate in thanking Placer County and Placer County staff. As Crystal said, things have changed with the priorities and so forth, and we've always had open communications and brainstormed and collaborated on the best ways to get these amendments online as soon as possible. So we appreciate the partnership as well.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? No? All right. So let's see. We're going to go to public comment right now. If any member of the public wishes to address the Regional Planning Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So I don't see anyone left in the room that hasn't already spoken. Crystal. So we'll go online, and I see we have a few hands raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 hands raised. The first hand up is Rob Olson. Rob, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello. This is Rob Olson. I'm a resident of Alpine Meadows, property owner in the Tahoe Basin, Tahoe Vista. We have a project in Tahoe City that we're trying to do. And these amendments really are part of the steps that we need to do to help get more workforce housing. I think they can help a lot of housing move forward. That doesn't mean it's going to be a flood of housing and overfill the marketplace with all this workforce housing, which I think would be actually a great thing. But it still doesn't mean a flood. It means that projects that have been in the pipeline that are being pushed through by local smart developers that understand the industry and what it takes to get a project through to actually get these going and get them to the finish line. And so just kindly ask to keep pushing it through all the various steps that there is to get this ratified and adopted. And, you know, we're concerned, I live here, we're concerned about fire. We're concerned about the environment. We're concerned about all of that. And I think that these code amendments really can help complement those efforts that I know some are really concerned about. We do need fuel reduction, but we also need buildings that are built to current standards that meet WUI standards that will resist fire. And we need people that live here, and we need people that are investing in the community, and that can help the environment. But also updating new projects that are otherwise just going to sit there and just keep getting blighted, to update their BMPs and update things that help the environment. As well, people not living out of the area and driving 45 minutes to work and driving back 45 minutes to home. They're actually walking to work or taking a bus or riding a bike. And I care about it. Like, I try to ride my bike to the office during the summertime as much as I can. And cars need to be, you know, we need to use the car sparingly and use public transportation and self means of transportation by walking or riding bikes as much as we can. So these amendments help us live a smarter life in Tahoe, and I appreciate your consideration on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. All right, next up.
Next hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, please unmute to make your comment.
TahoeCleanAir.org on this particular agenda item. I once again placed the TahoeCleanAir.org Independent Lake Tahoe Basin Wildfire Evacuation analysis on the record today, as I did during the TRPA October 24, 2024 Governing Board meeting. The analysis represents substantial new information since the Placer County's Tahoe Area Plan Amendment, of which TBAP is a subject of current and ongoing litigation. As evidence of urgently needed additional regional evacuation planning, the TRPA Executive Director sent an email to me on September 26, 2024, stating, "Your study," referring to the independent analysis, "is raising more awareness of the urgent need for regional evacuation planning." At this point, the independent analysis, as well as numerous documents submitted to Placer County and part of the record as connected with the current writ of mandate legal action, provide documented testimony that town centers represent evacuation choke points, which have created in the past during wildfires hazardous panic, vehicle accidents, and gridlock during a no-notice wildfire evacuation. The project IEC fails to comply with CEQA as detailed in the letter that was sent to, by our TRPA attorney Don Mooney on February 27, 2024 to the TRPA. This lack of substantial evidence to justify the less than significant impact in connection with the IEC checklist 76 and 77 runs counter to at least even though it's California, the California First Appellate ruling, Bonta versus County of Lake, and for TRPA to make these findings without substantial evidence, along with overall FONSI, would be arbitrary, capricious, and will represent prejudicial abuse of discretion on the part of the TRPA. Neither the TRPA, its regional plan government partners, or any developer should be allowed to make it harder for people to escape deadly fires. And I appreciate at least Miss Aldean's comment about wildfire evacuation. You guys are inching your way towards what will be inevitable. You will need to do it. And there will be projects that, especially in California, that will be halted until you address these issues, including wildfire ignitions. This is according to the California Appellate Court. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. All right, next up, we have, it looks like Ann.
Yep, next hand up is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. Really kind of object to how this was handled because it was hidden in the initial letter from Julie. This deserves, since it's in litigation, wouldn't you think it deserves its own agenda item so that the public could easily find it? It was confusing to me whether it was part of an MOU update or what it was. It looks like it's hidden, and I hope that you're not trying to do that. So anyway, we did have an area plan, and it's in litigation. So it's not like we didn't have one, and that was the year due date that now you have to do this. This is a change in process. Normally, it would go to the county for approval and then to you. But now, you know, your past processes don't matter anymore, I guess. And as far as workforce housing, it's really a red herring because you're not saying that it's achievable housing with no income cap. That's not workforce housing. Workforce housing is 120% or 80% of the average median income. This made up definition, which is what most everybody wants to build, including the fellow that just spoke about Chalet Blanc, he wants achievable housing. They're all waiting to get the more height and the more density and the more coverage. And what they're doing too is they're picking and choosing. They're saying, well, you know, we want the height, but we won't take this other. Will that be okay? You know, so they're it's like a shopping list of things they want to do. So, you know, I just hope that you would treat this with, you know, the North Shore is not like the South Shore. We say this all the time. 65 feet, 100% coverage, no income cap. And I wish you'd listen, because then we'd have less litigation. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Looks like we have one more hand raised. Aaron?
Yep, the last hand raised is Aaron Casey. Aaron, please unmute to make your comment.
Yep. Erin Casey here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak representing the Tahoe Housing Hub. I want to start by recognizing Placer County's leadership in tackling the housing crisis. And we think the Phase 2 housing amendments are definitely a critical step towards smart, sustainable, and attainable housing. Too often we talk about housing in numbers, but really behind those numbers are people. And for example, Amy, who is somebody that we've recently interviewed around our storytelling campaign, is actually a third grade teacher at Kings Beach Elementary. She has dedicated over 20 years to our students, including my daughter when she went to school there. Yet she and her son live in a small rental. He sleeps in the bedroom, she sleeps in the kitchen. She has not been able to identify additional housing opportunities, and as a result is very concerned about her ability to retain her role at Kings Beach Elementary School. She's not alone, and we hear stories like this and are interviewing people on a daily basis because they often cannot come to these meetings to provide comment on their experience. And it's not just policymakers and agencies that are working to fix this problem. I do want to highlight that there are many local residents, property owners, businesses, small-scale developers who live here, who want to be a part of the solution, who we talk to on a daily basis. They want to build accessory dwelling units. They want to convert underutilized properties into housing or support new housing efforts within their own neighborhood. They care. And they want to make a difference. And that is why these amendments, from our perspective, are so critical. They provide the tools and the flexibility that our residents need to move forward with solutions. We don't think this is unchecked growth. This is about protecting the people who make our community what it is. And the decisions that we make today will determine whether Tahoe remains a place where people can live and work, or a place where only second homeowners and short-term rental visitors can afford to stay. So I would urge you to approve these amendments. We really think they're a step in the right direction and will allow a lot of the local residents who do want to make a difference an opportunity to do so. So that Amy's story is no longer the norm. It's actually the exception instead of a standard that many people have to face as they try to live and work and provide service and raise their families in our community. The final thing I want to note is, to my understanding, you all have revised your bonus unit program, which restricts the number of quote unquote achievable housing bonus unit opportunities. And so I do think that's an important detail and nuance that hasn't been presented. And I think it is important to note that while achievable units are available, they're a much smaller percentage of the total bucket of deed restricted bonus units that you all make available. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Aaron. So it looks like we don't have any other hands raised, so we'll close public comment on this item. Any further comments from committee members? Cindy?
I just wanted to, restate that I believe achievable housing, as Placer County interprets it, and TRPA, I believe, is in the same definition. Those units must be occupied by somebody who works for a locally based employer. So the issue of incomes, I know, continues to challenge the public, yet we'd be back here every 6 months trying to change the income limits that a nurse or a nurse practitioner might earn, or a teacher is hired to become a principal and now makes more money. Those are the challenges with being at capping it at a percentage of AMI. And that's exactly why we didn't do it, because we were hearing those stories from our nurses, our teachers, our public safety employees, who often do make a more middle income salary, but still can't find a place to live. So am I correct that everything that when we say achievable, it is still based on you must work for a locally based employer?
Karen Fink, that's correct. And when we approved these amendments, we added an additional requirement that their job they need to be required to work in the basin for their job. So, so that, is just sort of an additional thing that in a way is another barrier actually, but it also assures that they really are for local workers.
Well, and I really appreciate the concerns people have that that there could be misuse of those units. Again, they're designed in these multifamily type of apartments not to be luxury condominiums. And because so few even meet the achievable standard, they would be a combination in order to even come close to to meeting these definitions. So I feel very comfortable with this, and unless there's other discussion, I'm happy to make the motion on this.
First, let's see, any other discussion? Nope. All right, then Cindy, we'll leave it to you.
Then I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the required findings as described in attachment C, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the area plan amendment as described in the staff summary.
Thank you. Maria?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper, Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hennigan,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
Great, thank you. So we have a second motion.
A motion to recommend adoption of ordinance 2025, amending ordinance 2024-01 to amend the Placer County Tahoe Basin Area Plan as shown in attachment A.
All right, Maria?
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper, Mr. Settlemyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hennigan,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we're on to agenda item number 6, upcoming topics. As a reminder to the public, since this item is informational only, members of the public are welcome to comment at the final public comment item. John?
Mr. Chairman, John Hester. I know the committee will be deeply upset about this, but we have no items for sure on the agenda for the Regional Planning Committee until May after the retreat.
Wow.
If you can't stand it, we can probably try to find something, but otherwise I think you're off the hook.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 7, committee member comments. Anyone on the committee have any comments? Seeing none, we will move on to our last real item, which is our final public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the Regional Planning Committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. Regional Planning Committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during this public comment period. Finally, comments must relate to matters within the jurisdiction of this agency. So I don't think there's any public left in the room, but if any member of the public wishes to speak at this time online, raise your hand by pushing the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So I do see a hand up. Doug?
Doug Flaherty, please unmute to make your comment.
Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Just a couple of items. The TRPA, including its committee members, which are board members, would really gain a tremendous benefit of goodwill and collaboration with the public if you would simply, which you could easily do, modify the regional plan to allow a step of mediation in the approval process of code changes, area plans, and major projects. What do you have to lose? That way, the public doesn't have to spend the money on a lawsuit, which, as I've mentioned earlier, seemed to be something that your past attorney cherished when he would repeat the mantra that if you don't like it, just sue us. I mean, why not include a mediation step? Yes, it still costs money, but it's going to be much, much more of a glide path towards cooperation. So that's one. And the other is really, I've mentioned this before, this archaic website that you have. It is so behind the times. Just go to the search engine, type in compact, type in MOU, type in Tahoe Events, Tahoe Events Center. Type in any term that should cause a website to be responsive and give you options. I can guarantee you, and I'll bet you a quarter, that when you type those items in, nothing comes up. And then the public is left trying to figure out, how the heck do I maneuver this? And they go through all these steps to try to find something that connects to what they're talking about. I've done this for years. And for the TRPA not to bring the website up to modernization, especially the search engine, really continues to, kind of make the public believe that, as always, this is just another way to prevent the public from doing research and making public comments that you may not like. So I would really encourage update of the website. And then lastly, I want to make sure that everyone understands, I've said this before, we all have our roles. Vince has his, I've got mine, everybody else has theirs. So for a unevolved board or committee member to say that we're against all development is so patently false. I've got better things to do than, lead some sort of a mantra like that. We're simply asking for reasonable environmental evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I don't see any other hands raised, so we will close public comments. And we'll move on to our final item, which is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion passes. We are adjourned at 3:25 p.m. Thank you.